our first presentation, which is going to be from Bernadette Wrynn. And as I've already said, we're delighted to have Bernadette with us here today, and her work is truly innovative. And we're delighted that she has joined us today, and I think joined us for future events as well. So Bernadette Wrynn.
Thank you, Maureen. Delighted to be here, everybody. I hope there isn't too much of an echo. Now, I hope everybody can see that. Great, fantastic. So I am a lecturer in curriculum studies, methodology and assessment in the tribal department in Maynooth University. And a number of years ago, we set out to consider looking at developing a level 9 master's program in the department. And really what started the process off was looking at the work we did at undergraduate level. And at undergraduate level, we have obviously minor dissertations being completed by our education students in the area of action research. So there was I suppose, a principle there and a basis for looking at action research and looking at it in more depth at level 9 in the department. So that's where we started from, and we considered a focus on self-study action research as the main basis for the postgraduate program, Master of Education Research in Practice. The priority for us as a department was to ensure that this was focused on students' own practice and teachers' own practice in their own setting. And we wanted to make sure that it was applicable and meaningful in the setting for each and every student that embarked on this program. So we looked at obviously the objectives. We considered the potential for the program to be run over one academic year. And with that in mind, we came up with this framework and this design whereby students could engage in this postgraduate program over 1 year. And the focus would be on self-study action research in their own setting. So moving on a bit more. There we go. So just to kind of give you a sense of the context, we certainly wanted to make sure that there was an alignment and a compatibility with COSON, the Teaching Council guideline for professional development for teachers. We wanted to make sure that there was, I suppose, an emphasis on looking at teachers in the context of their own setting, but also to ensure that they could view this as a form of their own professional development in their own school. And that was really, really important. Credit allocation was another issue for us in terms of looking at how this level 9 would be, I suppose, sitting on the national framework for qualifications and what those, I suppose, what that criteria looked like in terms of credit allocation. So there were a couple of things that we wanted to make sure were, I suppose, the foundations for this course. And another aspect of this course was obviously the values-based practitioner research as part of the self-study endeavour that teachers would take part in. And that was the main difference really from the undergraduate to the postgraduate programme, that there was this more in-depth exploration of values, and that teachers would, I suppose, examine and interrogate their own values as teachers, because we could see that as the program started to develop and evolve, that there was this tension and this, I suppose, conflict with where teachers were at in their own settings, where they were engaging in practices, but weren't necessarily always aligned to their own values as a teacher. And this examination became quite interesting over the course of the programme. And as we developed the programme, we could see that this was something that we needed to unpack more and more. There were a couple of, I suppose, housekeeping issues and issues around staff capacity. We wanted to ensure that we developed a programme that would, I suppose, be credible in terms of our staff's own experience of action research. We ensured that staff were engaging in undergraduate work with students engaging in action research, and that some staff would have an opportunity to engage in action research themselves in their own practice. The blended components were also a new departure for us in our department. So we had to consider an option for some blended opportunities for students, for teachers, obviously engaged in the research, so that there would be, I suppose, a flexibility and a feasibility attached to what we were doing in the working year. So just moving on a bit more, I decided to reflect on this course for the purposes of today. I thought it was an opportunity to obviously introduce myself as a member of this wonderful group, and to thank also the work of Maureen, Mary, Katrina and Bernie in their efforts in this course, because they are pivotal members of this Master of Education that we run. I also see Anthony Malone there. I just wanted to say hello to Anthony, because he was very helpful in the early days when we were looking at, I suppose, the structure of engaging with supervision of theses and looking at the assessment end of the level 9 course, and that was very gratefully received, Anthony, at the time. So what I decided to do was I looked at course feedback, I looked at surveys that teachers engaged in, and evidence from focus group and the external examiner reports over the past number of years, to maybe identify possible trends and to look at opportunities for the future. We're now in our 5th year of the course, and we've had one full cycle of external examination in this course as well. So it was certainly rich in terms of insight and feedback that I was able to harness some thoughts from that process over the past few years. So we've had evaluations over 4 years from an external examiner, and we're now in our 2nd cycle of that. There were focus groups during external examinations as well, which were very insightful for us. And of course, surveys and the like that were distributed to teachers who had completed the course and that were on their exit route towards graduation at the time. One of the things that struck me about some of the feedback that came from the external examination was that there was a need to look outside of action research, in a sense, in order to, I suppose, provide an apprenticeship for students and for researchers, obviously, to engage in further research at level 10. But I suppose there were a couple of things that we felt were up for debate on that, if you like, in terms of the capacity that we were able to offer in the department, but also in terms of the time frame that we were able to facilitate this range of methodological and theoretical paradigms that were possible or not possible to include in the program. So it's something that we do look at in terms of the dimensions of research paradigms within the program, but it's always something that we have to consider in light of the practicalities of running a program like this, and considering what we need to, I suppose, hold as an absolute value for us in terms of running a self-study action research. So moving on again, a couple of the things that were raised really over the past number of years that I wanted to mention. Sometimes there might have been a deviation from students away from the fact that it was a focus on self-study. There's obviously the broader term of action research, and then we have the more, I suppose, intense focus on someone's practice, looking at my own practice. And Mary alluded to the fact that it was important to look at one's self in the situation and to look at oneself in the context in which they practice. And I think that was really, really important for us to ensure that that was embedded early in the program. And therefore we decided to have a week-long summer school in August so that everyone would come together and get a really strong sense of what self-study action research would be about, what the principles were about. And that this was not something that I suppose was a label of research activity that didn't actually carry through all the way to the end of the activity and the work. And I suppose that's connected to perceptions of research as well. There was this, I suppose, perception of research coming from participants in the earlier days, particularly at the start of the program, that this research would follow a particular formula, that there would be a sense of doing step 1, 2, 3, 4, and that we would be completed. And I suppose it was important for us to look at the flexibility around that model in terms of looking at self-study and looking at I suppose, the organic nature, if you like, of what self-study can be about. So that was important in terms of looking at also how it was assessed. And if our rubrics could be, I suppose, held up to the idea of how we measure self-study achievement, how we look at it in terms of validity, how we compare one self-study with another in terms of looking at the cohort of students. So there were a couple of things there that we felt we had to ensure that we were considering. The dissertation journey was something, again, that we knew we had to map out in line with how students were going to be mapping out their year and their research activity. Again, with flexibility in mind here, because the dissertation journey was going to be so different in many ways for the participants. Again, going back to values-based self-study research, this was something that we wanted to ensure was embedded across the supervision process, but also across the writing process, because we found that over time that students maybe tended to forget about their values when immersed in looking at their practice. So trying to combine and consider how self-study is informed by values and is something that is driving their self-study and is driving the practices that they're engaging in or changing the practices that they're engaging in. That was something that we really wanted to ensure wasn't lost in the process. And that was one of the challenges also. One of the significant challenges for participants was the whole area of teacher as reflective practitioner. This was something that was a core module. It ran through the year, but it was a skills area that participants really found difficulty with in terms of immersion, in terms of developing their own style as a reflective practitioner, recording their thinking, considering how it all fits into their thinking around their practice, and looking at how they can, I suppose, respond to their own reflections and be reflexive in their practice also. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the challenges of pre and post pandemic for the MEd, just to say that we certainly learned lessons from the practice of using blended learning more so. And it was interesting from the feedback that students actually wanted to engage more in person after that experience, rather than having a 50-50 split in terms of blended learning. There were a couple of challenges with regard to looking at the notion of data, and this is going back to my point about perceptions of research earlier. In the undergraduate program, there's a very clear set of demands and a clear set of achievements to be reached. And therefore, one would argue that there is this, I suppose, formula or model of adhering to particular milestones in doing a minor dissertation. We wanted to ensure that there was this broadening of thinking to the extent that teachers were engaging in very immersed practice on their own on their own work in schools and in early education settings as well, so that there was this, I suppose, less prescriptive model to what they were doing in their self-study.